There's something about rainy nights that makes everything feel more still, more vulnerable. When the wind howls through the trees and the rain taps against your window, you're not sure if it's just weather or something watching you. These are real stories from people who were alone during a storm, and not all of them made it through the night. Put on your headphones, turn off the lights, and whatever you do, don't look outside. Welcome to over 2 hours of terrifying rainy night horror stories. You wake up to the sound of birds chirping, sun peeking through the tent flap, and your first thought is, dang, that bear was loud last night. Well, that's a normal Tuesday for me. Name's Ryan. I'm a 27-year-old park ranger, and I live about as close to the edge of the wilderness as you can get without needing a permit. Think national parks/reserve mountains all around, dirt roads, pine trees tall enough to hide a cell tower. And the air is so clean, it almost tastes sweet. I've got a one-room log cabin. No TV, no internet. Just me, my gear, and a few that make all those tech bros cry on their treadmills. I guess you could say I'm an adventure junkie. Always have been. Camping with bears. Done it. Sleeping under a thunderstorm in a hammock. Twice. I ate nothing but beef jerky for breakfast 5 days straight, once just because I could. The local store guy thinks I'm nuts, but he still stocks the teriyaki kinda life. I live out here because, honestly, it's where I belong. The quiet, the trees, the rush of wind down a ravine. It all makes sense to me in a way cities never could. Growing up, we didn't have much. My folks were good people, hardworking and kind. The kind who packed you a sandwich, even if they were skipping lunch themselves. But money, well, that was always tight. Vacations meant a beat-up tent, a bag of dollar store marshmallows, and the same pair of jeans all week. I didn't care. Those were the best days of my life. I remember the crackle of the campfire. Mom grilling whatever Dad pulled out of the lake that morning. Bluegill usually. Dad said they were ugly fish, but tasty as heck. We'd all sit on upturned logs, roasting marshmallows so cheap they stuck to your fingers worse than gum. The stars above seemed like they were putting on a show just for us. But my favorite part, caving. My dad had this thing for exploring the old mines scattered around the hills. Some were sealed off, but others? Well, let's just say we didn't ask permission. He'd bring a couple flashlights, a cheap plastic helmet for me, and we would spend hours down in those tunnels. It was cool and damp, the air always smelling like whetstone and rust. I felt like Indiana Jones, minus the whip and, the giant boulders. Just a scrawny kid with dirt on his face, and his old man showing him the ropes. Those summers, they shaped me. I didn't have, new Converse like the other kids at school. My backpack was duct taped, and my lunch was wrapped in tinfoil. No fancy boxes, but I had stories. Real ones. And when I grew up, well, I never really let go of that. College was a deeter. Got a degree in environmental science because, hey, turns out love in the woods can be useful. Most of my classmates wanted to work for conservation groups or wear ties and argue about wetlands in a boardroom. Me, I just wanted to get back out of here. And I did. Now, officially, I'm a park ranger. But I'm not the type who hands out trail maps or stands around sipping coffee by the station porch. I'm what they call a caver. That's right. I take people, mostly kids, into the caves near the park trails. We explore the tunnels. I teach them about bats and rock formations. I spook them with scary stories, and we all run like heck when we actually see a bat at the end of the day. They all get a shiny badge that says Junior Cave or something like that. Their parents take pictures. The kids feel like explorers. And I get to pretend like I'm 10 years old again. It's a good gig. Honest work. Been doing it 5 summers now, and I know these caves like the back of my hand. Of course, it's not always fun and games. Some summers have been weirder than others. I've seen things down there that I don't talk about often. Strange things. Things that don't fit into my ranger manual or any biology textbook. But I'll get to those. My name is Ryan, and I'm a cave explorer. These are my stories. Now, cave exploring has always been strange. Heck, anything that has to do with the woods or dark, tight places is strange if you think about it. There's just something ancient about being in a cave. When you're down there, away from sunlight. No phone signal, no road noise. Surrounded by rock on all sides. It does something to your brain. It's not like a haunted house or a horror movie. This is a different kind of fear. Older. Like something deep in you remembers being afraid of places just like that. Some people can't handle it. They panic, start breathing fast, sweating. One kid threw up in his helmet once. It's not even the tight spaces that get him. It's the stillness, the silence. You feel like you've been dropped off the face of the earth. Me? Well, I love it. Always have. I guess I'm one of the weird ones. I like the quiet. I like the cold air and the crunchy gravel under my boots. I like how your voice bounces off the walls in funny ways. I even like the smell. Kind of earthy, kind of damp. Reminds me of being a kid when Dad and I would go crawling through the old mine shafts in the hills. Just me, him, and a cheap flashlight from the gas station. But even I have to admit, there are times when it gets too quiet, when the silence feels heavy, and sometimes when you're really deep inside the mountain, it feels like you're not alone. I've been leading these cave tours for a while now, 5 summers and counting. I've taken groups of kids into all kinds of caverns. Most are shallow, wide, easy to move around in. We keep it safe, we keep it light, tell ghost stories, talk about stalactites, get them their little explorer badge, like I said, and it's good fun. But not every summer is the same. Some summers are off. The first time I saw something, I couldn't explain. It was back in 2009. I remember the year because it was hot as hell that season, and the caves were the only place that felt cold. I had a group of 10 kids, maybe 12. A mix of middle schoolers, mostly city kids. They got loud when they got nervous, which was fine by me. Better than crying. We were in this cave I'd explored 100 times. It had a little natural stone bridge about halfway through. Kind of a neat feature. Nothing dramatic, just a bump in the trail. We were almost across it when it gave out. I don't know if it was the heat or the weight of the group, or maybe time just wore it down, but that section of the rock just snapped and down we went. Not far, thankfully, maybe 6 or 7 feet, but one of the girls landed wrong. A couple of rocks slid down with us, and one of them pinned her leg. She screamed loudly. Everyone else screamed too, which didn't help. My partner Josh was already on the radio before I even got to her. I kept her talking. Kept her breathing slow. Asked her about her dog, her favorite TV show. Stuff like that. She calmed down fast, too. Tough kid. Help showed up fast. The whole team was trained for stuff like this. They had her out in under an hour. Her leg wasn't even broken, just bruised up badly. But while we waited, we were stuck down there. Just me and her. The others moved out for safety. And it was then that I felt something. Do you ever feel like you're being watched? I know. It's a stupid thing to say. Everybody asks that. But that's what it felt like. Not just a feeling. I knew. Something was watching us from the dark tunnel ahead, past where the light reached. And then I saw 2 small red points of light, round, unmoving, just hanging there in the dark, like a pair of coals. I didn't say anything, not to the girl. She didn't see it. And I made sure she didn't look that way. I told the team to speed up, told them I didn't like it down here. They must have thought I was just spooked from the fall. As soon as the girl was up and out and they cleared the area, I told them I needed to double check something, and I went back in alone. Now I know what you're thinking. That was dumb. But I wasn't thinking straight. I thought maybe it was a raccoon or an owl, or worse, some stupid teenager with a flashlight trying to mess with me. We get pranksters like that every now and then. So I went back down the tunnel, past where a bridge had been, past where we landed, and I kept going. The cave narrowed quickly. I had to duck, then crouch, then finally get down on my belly and crawl. Eventually, the tunnel opened up again. There was a wide space, round and low, with a little slope of rubble in the back. In the far corner, hunched over something furry. It was a thing. I don't even know what to call it. It was pale, like it hadn't seen the sun in 100 years. Real skinny, but strong looking. The legs bent wrong. Its back was arched like it had been crawling for too long. Its head moved in little jerks, kind of like a bird. It was chewing on a dead skunk. I watched it tear off a piece with these sharp little teeth, and I felt something in me scream to get out, but I didn't move. Not until it lifted its head and looked toward me. I didn't wait for anything more. I backed out the way I came fast. When I got to the bridge, or what was left of it, I took out my knife and cut the ropes I'd used to brace the edge, letting the whole thing fall in. When I got back to the station, I told the team animals that they had gotten into that section. Said it wasn't safe anymore. Too unstable, too risky. We marked it off on the map and told future groups to steer clear. I never mentioned what I really saw, and I never went back. You know, my mom used to say something when I was little, back when Dad and I would go crawling through the mines on the weekends. She'd stand by the porch with her arms crossed, shaking her head like she knew something we didn't. She'd say, "You think you're all alone in there. Think again. Back then, I thought you just meant bears. Maybe bats. Now I'm not so sure. There are strange things that live in these caves. Now all rangers see things, maybe not right away, but give it time. Especially us cavers. We spend more hours underground than above it some weeks, and the things we come across, they don't always make sense. Every one of us has a story we keep off the books. Stuff that doesn't make it into the welcome packet or the park website. Some of it's harmless. Weird, but harmless. Some of it sticks with you. The next one I've got is about cave water. Simple stuff, really. But I've learned a long time ago, nothing in these caves is ever just what it seems. When I was a trainee, most of my time was spent hauling gear, holding flashlights, and trying not to screw anything up. That's the real start of it. If you want to know how someone becomes a proper caver, it's not glamorous. You don't show up with a headlamp and a vest and suddenly get handed a badge and a whistle. You put in hours, weeks, following the older guys around like a shadow, learning what to touch and what not to, what clay looks like when it's ready to collapse, how to read airflow off a dead end. And then there's the scientific work. That's the part most people outside the field don't think about. People hear caverns and picture some crazy guy with ropes and a machete. But a real cavern, our kind, it's controlled, precise. We map, we log formations, we take samples. Some folks do biology work. Others focus on water movement, structural stability, minerals, bat populations, that sort of thing. If you're in the field full-time, odds are you've got a degree, maybe two. It's not all glory and dirt. Back then, the head of our training team was this guy named Jackson. Big guy, loud, always talking like he was on camera. He wore too much Axe body spray, to the point where it clung to the insides of the damn helmets. I think he thought it made him cool. I was a few years younger, fresh out of school and eager to prove myself, so I kept my mouth shut about it. At the time, I assumed everyone around me was experienced. You know how it is when you're new. You figure anyone with gear and a clipboard must know what they're doing. It only took me a few hours to realize I'd been very wrong. We went out to a cave called Splitjaw. Locals named it that because of the jagged entrance. It's not a tourist site, more of a steady location. Remote unlit. The kind of place where GPS stops working halfway through the hike. Our objective was simple. Track moisture deposits along a fault line that ran down the center of the second chamber. Seemed easy enough. We got inside fine. Helmets on, pack secured. The first mile or so was the usual. Tight passage, small pools, chalk markings from past teams. But then we hit the chute. It was about 40 feet down, angled just steep enough to make you second-guess yourself. The whole thing was caked in thick, wet clay, like someone had taken a hose to a water slide. Going down was easy. You just sat and let gravity take care of it. But I remember looking back up once I was at the bottom and thinking, how the hell are we getting out of here? No ropes, no spikes, nothing to grab onto. Should we rig something? I asked. Jackson just grinned. We'll figure it out when we get there. That was the first time my gut twisted a little. Later on, we came to the river. It cut straight through the chamber like someone had dropped a saw blade through the rock. The walls on either side were about 8 feet high, smooth, with barely any holes. The water itself wasn't that wide, maybe 10 to 12 feet across, but it was moving fast, waist deep and cold as hell. Jackson stood at the edge, peering down into the water like he was trying to guess its mood. You think it's deep? I asked. He smirked. Only one way to find out. I gave him a look. You know, it's not really science, I said. Sure it is. Fuel testing, he said, tightening the straps on his pack. "Are you bringing a rope this time?" Or Jackson grinned. "Where's the finding ropes?" I roll my eyes. "Okay, seriously, man, the current's moving. We screw this up. We're not climbing out of here." He stepped in without answering. Jackson was the first in. I went next. The current hit me like a truck. I nearly lost my footing twice before I got to the other side. Climbing the opposite wall took everything I had. I scraped my forearms raw, trying to pull myself up on wet rock, cursing under my breath the whole time. But what happened next made all that feel like nothing. Jackson was about halfway across when he stopped moving, just stopped like he'd hit something under the surface. Then he lurched forward and went under. Not sleeping. Well, everyone panicked. One guy dropped his pad. Another jumped in. Took 3 of us to drag Jackson back up. The water fought us the whole way like it didn't want to let him go. When we got him up, he was screaming so loud I couldn't think. Just this raw, horrible sound. His leg was torn up. Deep red gashes down his calf and thigh. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was his foot. The toes were gone. Gone like something had bitten straight through the boot and the flesh underneath. Clean. There was no blood in the water when he went under. No warning, no flash of anything moving. Just him. And then paying. We wrapped his leg in a shirt and used a spare rope as a tourniquet. It wasn't clean, but it was enough to get him moving. We abandoned the mission, obviously, left some gear behind, carried Jackson out inch by inch. When we got to the chute again, it was exactly as bad as I'd imagined. The clay turned every step into a fight. I clawed my way up with my nails, digging into dirt and slick rock, pulling myself one miserable foot at a time. At the top, I looked down and realized just how stupid we'd been. We filed an incident report when we got back. Standard procedure. I put in everything I saw. The pull, the wounds, the bite. I left out the part where I was afraid to go near water for weeks after. I figured that wasn't helpful. Jackson quit the next week, right after getting out of the hospital. Never came back to the station, never answered my text. I think part of him wanted to pretend it never happened. But I remember the sound of him screaming. The look on his face when he saw his foot. The strange silence from the rest of the team after we made it topside. Because here's the thing. Piranhas don't live in caves. And no rock in that water was sharp enough to bite a man's toes clean off. I still think about that river, about what could have been under there. We didn't go back. Nobody wanted to. The official word was hazardous conditions, but that's just paperwork. The truth is, something was in that water. Something strong, something fast, and something quiet. Jackson was lucky in a way. He made it out, and now he works in a fancy boardroom far away from this place. And if you ask around the ranger station, the ones who've been here long enough, you'll notice none of us go back there. I was about half a mile working on bat collection when the call came through. The job that day was simple. Monitor a cluster of roosting bats near an old drip line. I had my sample kit out. One glove on, fiddling with a set of tubes that didn't want to seal right. I was already annoyed, and my radio crackled right when I finally got the thing to sit straight. "Ryan, come in. We've got a situation." It was Linda, a fellow ranger who usually got stuck filing reports by the station. I clicked the receiver. "Go ahead. Girls missing. Summer group. My name's Lacey." "Yellow shirt," she said. I paused, squinting through the low light. Yellow shirt. Should be obvious. The last visual had her headed in your direction. "Copy," she said. "Copy. I'll start the sweep." I packed up the gear in a rush. Now, finding kids isn't like tracking adults. You don't look for footprints or call out names over and over like in the movies. Kids go where they feel small, where they can hide. You've got to think like one. I start small and move out. Always. It's counterintuitive. Most people think you search the big caverns first. Open areas, louder echo, easier to move through. But I found that kids don't like big, empty places. They like crawl spaces. Spaces they can wedge into, curl up, feel surrounded, comforted. It's how their brains work when they're scared. So I checked the tighter offshoots first. Cracks along the wall, dead-end tunnels, anything low and narrow. Call their name once or twice, quiet-like. Didn't want to spook her or anything else. After about 20 minutes, I heard the faint trickle of water. That was enough to narrow it down. On this side of the trail, there's a small shaft not far from a slow-drip tunnel. Not mapped anymore. Barely wide enough to squeeze through if you've had a big breakfast. I got on my hands and knees and shined my light into it. There she was. Lacy yellow shirt, curled up with her knees pulled through her chest. Maybe 10 or 11 years old, wide-eyed but calm. Not crying, not shaking. Just quiet. "Lacy, hey, you mind coming out here with me?" I said, keeping my voice steady. She nodded and held up her arms like she already knew I'd carry her. I held on to her and crawled out backward. It took a few extra breaths to get upright again, but we were out in no time. She held onto my shoulder like a backpack strapped the whole way back. Didn't sing much. Later, after she'd had some water and the other kids had stopped crowding her, I sat with her by the gear bench. "You okay?" She nodded. "I wasn't scared. You did great. Real smart staying put. Makes it easier for us to find you." She looked at me, then glanced down at her shoes. "You weren't the first to find me." I blinked. "What do you mean? There was a man before you got here." I sat up straighter. "A man?" She nodded. "He had a big coat and a hard hat and a long beard. He said you'd come to get me." I stared at her for a long second. "You're sure?" She looked me dead in the eyes. "He said his name was Henry." Now, there hasn't been a mining team in these mountains since the 70s, before the park got its official status. This whole range was a network of old claims and tunnels, most of them long since sealed or collapsed. I helped seal some of them myself. No access, no light, no reason for anyone to be down there. When I got back to the station that night, I went straight to my supervisor's office. His name's Mitch. Old-timer. Been here longer than the paint on the walls. I asked him if he knew anything about a miner named Henry. He didn't even blink. "You saw Henry?" I paused. No, one of the kids did." He leaned back in his chair and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Yeah, that sounds like him." "Who is he?" I asked. Mitch looked toward the window like he needed to picture it. Back when they were still digging for gold out here, there was a collapse. About 9 men got buried in the shaft near Saddle Ridge. Only 4 made it out. One of them was Henry. Henry something. Nobody remembers his last name, just that he was the foreman. Real serious guy. Carried a pickaxe everywhere, even above ground. Story goes, he died trying to dig out the others. Refused to leave until he got everyone out. Didn't make it, Mitch explained. I sat there trying to process it. "So you're telling me a ghost helped this kid?" Mitch gave a small shrug. "Well, he's not the kind that scares folk. He's quiet. Stays out of sight unless he's got a reason. But yes, some of the rangers believe in him, especially the older ones. We've had stories like this before." "How many?" I asked. Mitch leaned forward. "Well, every couple years, lost kid found safe, usually by water. They always say the same thing. Hard hat, big beard. Didn't talk much. I didn't know what to say. Years passed after that. Lacy's group came and went. But it wasn't the last time something like that happened. 8 times out of 10, when a kid goes missing on that side of the range, I find them by water. Same exact spot I found her. Sometimes it takes an hour, sometimes a few, but they're always okay. A little shaken, but fine. And they always mention the man in the hard hat. So now when kids get lost and we're out searching, I tell the rookies not to worry too much if we're in Henry's territory. I tell them to keep calm, stick to the paths, look for the stream, and when I find a kid, I ask them what happened. Most of the time they say a man helped me, and I know who they mean. Sometimes I leave coffee and a piece of bread by the old collapsed shaft near Saddle Ridge. Nothing big, just a thanks. I don't know if it matters. I don't expect anything in return, but it feels right over the years. I've seen some strange things in these caves. Good things, terrible things, things that'll make you think twice before cracking a joke about ghosts, things that make you double check your flashlight, even when it's fully charged. I've seen a lot in these caves. Some of it helpful, some of it dangerous, most of it very hard to explain. I've learned that kids don't wander far, but they don't always go where you'd expect, that the smallest spaces are where you look first, that water inside a cave is never just water, and that you always bring rope, even if you think you don't need it. I've learned there are animals that don't show up in any guidebooks, injuries that can't be blamed on rocks, sounds that aren't wind, no matter how much people want them to be. I don't have theories. I'm not that kind of guy. But I pay attention. You work a job like this long enough, and you stop looking for explanations. You just learn how to work around the things that don't make sense. Well, they gave me a promotion last fall. Field lead. Fancy title. Slightly bigger paycheck. Still the same dirt under my nails. The best part? I upgraded from beef jerky to bacon for breakfast. Honest to God, pan-fried bacon. That alone was worth the years I put in. I still keep a pack of jerky in the glove box out of habit, but it doesn't hit me now that I have tasted victory. Things have changed a bit since my trainee days. I don't get sent crawling through mudslides unless I volunteer, which unfortunately for me. I still do more often than I should, but I've got more say in what I take on now. More freedom in the field. I get to run my own research schedule during the off-season, which means no school groups until the summer rolls back around. Just me, the rocks, and the long list of data points the lab wants me to collect. Don't get me wrong, I miss the kids. Nothing beats the look on their faces. The first time they step into a cavern and realize how big and quiet the underground world really is. But these winter months, they've been peaceful, quiet. There's a rhythm to field work. Wake up early, gear up, hike out, take your samples, document, get back before dark, repeat. I don't mind the routine. There's always a project going on. Water quality in the limestone runoffs. Bat population tracking. Mineral shifts. Fungal growth studies. Stuff that sounds boring unless you're the one holding the flashlight and seeing it real up close. Sometimes I send the samples back in padded coolers. Sometimes I haul them out on foot. Either way, it keeps me moving. And that's the kind of life I like. And yeah, I still bring Henry his coffee. Not every week, but often enough. Sometimes I leave it just outside the collapsed shaft with a folded napkin and a square of bread. Sometimes it's a paper cup on a warm rock ledge. Nobody touches it, not even the animals. But the cup is always empty when I come back. The way I see it, Henry is a part of this place, same as the rest of us. The only difference is he's got more history in his bones. Now, if you ever think about becoming a ranger, especially a cave explorer, you better know what you're signing up for. You'll spend a lot of time cold, wet, surf, and questioning your life choices. You'll get used to eating granola bars at 3 a.m. and waking up with your face half frozen to your sleeve. You'll learn to walk without making noise, to crawl without panic, to know the difference between a rock shift and something else moving in the dark. You'll also see things most people never do. Light filtering through cords like a lantern. Bats swirling overhead in perfect silence. Pools so still they look like glass. And yes, sometimes things you can't quite explain. There are strange things that live in these parts. I've said it before, and I will say it again. Some things hide in the cracks, in the cold, and the silence. Strangers still are the people who stick around, the ones who see things and keep coming back, the ones who learn to live alongside the unexplainable, and walk the same routes like just part of the terrain. Most folks would run, or laugh it off, or pretend it never happened. We don't. We get up the next day and go back in. Because that's the job. And if you ask me, it's a job worth doing. There's something about being the person who helps a kid out of a crawl space, who gets a call, drops everything, and ends the day with everyone accounted for, who knows the tunnels well enough to make it back without markers. Yeah, some days are harder than others. Some weeks stretch longer than they should. But when it's all said and done and you walk out of the cave, you get to stand up straight again, peel off your gloves, and look up. And when you do, you get a sky full of real stars. That's the part no one tells you about. Not the weirdness, not the bruises, not even the scary stories. It's the stars. The moment when you come back to the surface, blink a few times, and see the whole damn sky waiting for you. That's what makes it worth it. That and the bacon. But seriously, if you ever do take the job, always bring extra rope. I'm a detective, and I've seen some things that I can't explain. These are my stories. I'm a detective, and so many years of working with the public have taught me three things. People lie, people tell half-truths, and people try to make themselves appear in the best light possible. Also, there really are things out there that can't be explained. Things you don't want to find yourself face to face with on a dark, lonely stretch of road. Lately, I find myself wanting to get it all down on paper before I forget the details. A friend of mine contacted me recently. He has decided to write a book about things he and his friends have witnessed over the years. We've agreed to post some of our stories online to see what the reaction is. I am spending the weekend at his home, going over stories together and answering any questions he has. I can't verify the truth of any of these stories, and frankly, if you insist on disbelieving what's out there, then there is really nothing you could ever see that would persuade you otherwise. Events over the past 10 years have made me realize that I might not be around forever. There are dark things out there, unexplained things. Maybe knowing this might do some good. It might even save your life one day. Let's start at the beginning. I graduated from school with a degree in law enforcement and forensics. Fresh out of university, it was more difficult than I thought to find a job. Looking back, it's probably because I showed up to the interviews with disheveled hair and slightly crumpled clothes. I'm not sure what this says about the state of our law enforcement, but a department finally did hire me, disheveled hair and all. I worked as an officer in a rural county in California. My work mostly consisted of smaller crimes like petty theft or a minor drug charge. I knew within a few months that I was going to lose my mind if I didn't change things up, so I set my mind on becoming a detective. My parents would later say they were responsible for my choice by their love of that old television show Columbo, but I think maybe it was fate. It took me a few years, but I finally did make detective. I was in my early 30s when I got the call that would alter my view of reality. It was like a fork in the road. Straight ahead was the path I'd spent my life on. One where it's true that terrible things happen, but there was always some kind of explanation. The path that veered to the left, however, was very, very different. It changes your life, seeps into your dreams, and you can't come back. A little girl aged 8 had gone missing 2 towns over. It had already been 24 hours since she had last been seen, and I was informed that the parents were currently the only suspects. I arrived at the house like any other. The family was middle class, had a nice yard with a swing set and a little playhouse. Another officer and I checked every inch of the property surrounding the home for footprints and signs of entry. Though some hours had gone by since her disappearance, the heavy rain had made the ground soft. It was impossible to conceal footprints if someone had gotten near her home. We checked every inch of the house, the garage, and the shed, finding nothing. I was greeted at the front steps by the father who nodded. "Please come in," he said somberly. We sat down in the living area, and I began to ask them questions, the basics. How long had she been gone? Where was she last seen? Had they seen anyone out of the ordinary the past few days? After a while, I could tell they had nothing to do with it. They were terrified. The mother could barely even speak. She just sat there, staring down at the glass table in front of her, hands shaking. I looked at them both one last time, checking to see if I had missed any signs of guilt, but nothing. I was sure they were innocent. "May I look in your daughter's room? It might help us find some indication of where she may have gone." Nodding without even looking up, the two of them just sat together, despondent and broken. I can tell you that most of the time I have dealt with cases of missing loved ones. Within the first few days, the parents and family typically are very worried but hopeful for their return. This was an especially odd case for me due to their withdrawn demeanor, and the unspoken thought between them that their daughter was indeed gone and was not coming back. I found the wooden staircase in the back of their home leading up to their daughter's room. A quiet sound of rain had begun to patter off the trees and windows. I remember it was raining because as I climbed the steps, I was suddenly reminded of one of my favorite paintings. It hung over the mantel in my parents' home, a family standing in a field. Holding hands and staring right out of the frame, almost back at you. Rain pours down behind them, and you can tell that in a few moments the storm will be on them as well. There's no outrunning it. That thought went through my head as I climbed the staircase and made my way down the hallway. The house was larger than expected, but I knew which room was the little girl's by patterns of stars spelling out her name on the outside of the door. Pushing the door open with a creak, a warm purple light greeted me from near the window. For a young girl, she was very organized. Everything in her room had its place. No clothes were unfolded, and every paper on her desk was neatly placed. I spent a few minutes going through them, but found nothing out of the ordinary. Just homework assignments and a few math sheets she must have been using to study. I checked under her bed, in her closet, and even under her mattress when I noticed something I hadn't seen first. The old wooden desk had a drawer sticking out on the right-hand side near the window. Sitting down at her desk, I opened the drawer and found a small notebook, perfectly placed in a single drawer. I pulled it out, opened the journal, and lit a cigarette. I hate to admit it, but I smoked over a pack a day back then, and sometimes I just couldn't think without one. The first few drawings were nothing out of the ordinary. Her home, her family. On one, she had drawn a puppy in a field of flowers. Typical little girl stuff. This little girl was very organized. Every person was neatly labeled below. Mommy, Daddy, me, etc. It wasn't until I went to put the book away that I almost missed a folded page in the very back of the book. I opened the paper and drew her lamp closer to get a better look. There were pink walls speckled with stars and planets, a desk in the corner by the window, and a child asleep in her bed. Sure enough, underneath the child was written the word me. I paused, took a breath, and looked closer at the window in her drawing. Though it was scribbled over, I could see the faint outline of something looking through. Below were 3 words written over and over again. It's not real. We never found her. The second incident happened a few months later in winter of the same year. I got a call in the late afternoon about a sailboat grounded near Muscle Rock Park. I asked the gentleman on the phone why they called me instead of the Coast Guard. His response was to the point. There were 3 bodies and certain things were questionable. I hung up the phone, shrugged, and drove out to the ocean where the boat had been found. The park was beautiful. Waves crashed upon boulders while seagulls flew from rock to rock, dodging the waves. The sailboat had somehow wedged itself into a set of rocks, and so far the authorities had been unable to pull it ashore. They were also worried that moving it might interfere with the evidence, and had been waiting for me to arrive. The boat appeared peaceful, about 30 yards offshore and swaying gently side to side. Climbing onto the dinghy, an old Coast Guard officer motored me over to the boat and tied us on. He nodded at me as I stepped onto the boat and was greeted by 2 men on the dock. I never asked them, but they must have been Coast Guard as well. "They're down below," one of the men said. I nodded, not sure what I was going to find, but completely unprepared for what I did. Walking below, I saw a table set for dinner. A man on one side, a woman and a boy around age 12 on the other. Their bodies were rigid and firm, looking frozen in place. I wondered how their bodies still managed to remain upright after the crash. Everything in the boat was stowed neatly away, and there were no signs of struggle, no obvious cause of death as well. Their expressions were blank, not surprised or afraid, just blank. I took countless photographs of everything, knowing this wasn't a typical case. As I bent over to take one of the boys, I noticed the tag sticking out of the front of his shirt. It was inside out and backwards. That's strange, I thought. Then I looked at the woman. Her clothing seemed normal, but both of her shoes were on the wrong feet. Without a clue as to what had happened, I was forced to wait for the coroner's report. A few days later, I found it on my desk. Reading it, I was in complete disbelief. After the autopsy, the father, mother, and child were all found missing something. The boy was missing his liver. The mother, her right lung. And the father. The father was missing his heart. After reading the report, I took lunch early and went to talk to the coroner in person a few cities away. He looked shaken and looked me straight in the eye. "This just isn't possible," he said. "There wasn't a mark anywhere on the bodies. No incisions, nothing. This just isn't possible." It turns out the family was on a 2-week vacation. They were planning on sailing to the Farallon Islands off the coast of San Francisco. 6 days out, they were reported missing by the grandfather after failing to contact him at the pre-planned time. No further evidence was ever found. The case remains open to this day. The last story has to do with a call that a friend of mine was on. I got a call at home at 2 a.m. saying that another officer named Henry had just suffered a heart attack and was currently being taken to the local hospital. The captain knew how close the two of us were, and I was the second one after Henry's brother that they thought to call. The drive to the hospital took me about 3 hours, and when I finally got there, I was more than relieved to see Henry sitting upright in his bed and talking, though weakly and slowly. I remember the look on his face. Fear. If you knew Henry, you would understand how out of the ordinary this was. He was not a fearful man. 2 combat tours in the military and working with me on some of the most disturbing cases you could imagine, and I'd never seen him scared. Not once. He was about 20 years older than I, and was the one I had always looked to in situations where I couldn't find an answer. He always came through. This is what he told me. I got the call right as I was leaving after a long day. I was about to clack out for the day when Sally happened to come across me in the hall. Smiling, she told me a call had just come in about a disturbance at a local school. A neighboring home had said there was a loud, constant noise coming from the playground of the school. They had specifically mentioned near the swings. I gave Sally a certain type of look and told her I hadn't worked at the department for over 20 years to be going out at 8 o'clock at night to deal with a couple of loud 16-year-olds on a swing set. She gave me that smile she always does, and I headed out on the call. I arrived at the school around 8:30 give or take, and I remember having to drive up a hill surrounded by trees on both sides. When I got to the school, I wasn't happy. Obviously, there was noise because there were maybe 100 children, but no teachers in sight. There was music playing, and it seemed to be some type of festival or school celebration or something. I radioed to Sally that when I got back, she and I were going to have a conversation. Then I exited the car and walked over to the playground. I walked through a group of children standing there listening to the music and what appeared to be a tall man on a wooden stage directly in front of the swings. I didn't want to disturb activities, but I sure as hell wasn't going out this way again tonight, so I made my way to the only adult I could find. I noticed there was a banner attached to the stage which read Harvest Day in old-style lettering. I guess that didn't strike me as anything out of the ordinary. What happened next, John? I don't understand. I got to the front of the stage and waved down the tall gentleman speaking. At first he didn't notice me, then I spoke louder. This time you noticed. His head turned rapidly toward me. He looked momentarily surprised, then a wide smile crept over his face. "Welcome, friend," he said. "Not everyone can see what is before them." As his gaze met mine, I could see his eyes clearly. They were solid black. I remember feeling my chest tense up, and the last thing I can tell you is that before I passed out, I turned around to see the faces of the children. Their bodies weren't like they had been before. They looked almost like us, John. Their skin was charred and burnt, and the smell was something else. Their eyes were gone, but they stared at me nonetheless. The pressure in my chest became unbearable, and I can't be sure, but I think that as I was passing out, the man said one last thing. "I'll see you soon, Henry." Henry was found hours later, near death, in an abandoned parking lot where an old school had been. Sally had known something wasn't right when he hadn't called back in and sent a car to check it out. He'd had a heart attack. His first. Luckily, it was somewhat mild and he survived. I hope you enjoyed these accounts. There are more to come. On the first Friday of each month, I would get a visit from the old detective. I'd sit on the dock and wait to hear any sign of my friend coming so I could start my journey across the marina. You could hear the old, broken-down two-seater coming from 3 counties over. Making it across the dock and up the ramp to the parking lot, I smiled at Henry and grabbed a handful of fishing gear. We set up near my boat in a virtually empty section of the marina. Noticing approaching storm clouds, we opted to have a beer and fish from the dock while we waited for the storm to pass. That way we could take cover in case the sky opened up and really started to pour. "How's the ticker?" I asked. "Tick-tock, John." He answered back, winking in my direction. We hadn't spoken any more about what he had told me at the hospital, but I think there was an understanding between us. At that time in my career, had it been anyone else that had told me his story, I would have chalked it up to a hallucination brought on by a heart attack. That evening, after not catching a thing all day, we packed up his gear and sat back down to relax and have a cup of coffee. Henry looked tired, and I hoped the coffee would help keep him awake for his drive home. We had talked around the subject all day, and I was more than fine with not discussing it farther, when suddenly Henry looked me in the eye. "I know what you're thinking," he said. "Henry, you don't have to. You're thinking it was a lack of oxygen to my brain. You're thinking it was just a hallucination. Generally speaking, I might have thought that too. But the thing is, I think something's following me. Not all the time, but once in a while, and only when I'm alone, I see something move out of the corner of my eye. Usually in the distance, but sometimes it's close. I try to think of something encouraging to say. "Well, at least you finally got some company," I said with a smirk. He laughed as we turned back to the water, watching as the last of the sunlight started to fade into darkness. "Hey, why don't you stay with me for a few days? Fishing and being around a friend might do you some good," I said. "I'll be fine," Henry replied. "But thank you." After walking him up to the parking lot, I stood there watching his taillights grow smaller and then fade completely from sight. I was worried about him. Later that night, I found it difficult to sleep and walked down the empty dock. Standing at the edge of the pier, I looked over at the low wall surrounding the marina. Beyond the wall is the shipping lane, and I watched as a freighter made its slow passage across the horizon. The decks of the ship were empty, and I thought how peaceful a life on the ocean could be. All of your problems a million miles away. Just you and the ocean. I'd always wanted to cross the ocean at night, surrounded by nothing but stars. I was about to turn and go back inside when I had a strange feeling like someone was watching me. Turning back towards the massive freighter, I took a closer look. Squinting, I could just make out someone standing on the upper deck. He appeared to be looking right at me. It was hard to tell from this distance, but the figure seemed to be unusually tall, and something about this made me very uneasy. I looked down for a moment, and when I looked back at the ship, there was no one there. The next case involved the body of a woman washing up on shore. A few weeks had passed since I last saw Henry. After his heart attack and subsequent story, the captain had been reluctant to send him out into the field again. He did finally allow him to work the scene, and we were assigned as partners on the case. I never told Henry, but the captain asked me personally to keep an eye on him. I would wager that in most departments, if a man had just had a heart attack and a hallucination, they wouldn't allow him back to work so soon, or maybe ever again. But that's just a testament to how good of a detective Henry was. We drove together over the Golden Gate Bridge and headed north on the old coastal highway. Arriving at our destination, we were met by a young officer, a woman maybe in her late 20s. She walked us over through the web of caution tape that encircled the scene. Handing me his camera, Henry knelt down to get a closer look at the deceased woman while I photographed the surrounding area. Right from the beginning, I could tell this was going to be a strange one. The deceased woman looked to be well over 100 years old. Although her skin was perfectly intact, it was creased and deeply wrinkled with age. Her hair was completely white, and her body was withered and hunched. She was wearing a pale pink dress with tiny seahorses and starfish embroidered along the neckline, and she had a silver necklace on. The necklace, upon further examination, had a pendant hanging from it. 3 small silver circles, twisted together to form some kind of misshapen triangle. It still looked pristine, I noted as I took a photograph. No scratches or imperfections, no sign of seaweed or algae on the necklace at all. I looked back down at the woman's body and noted there was no seaweed or algae on her clothing as well. Different thoughts went through my mind. "This isn't right," I told Henry. No, it's not," he replied softly. From the start, something was very off. We bounced crazy theories back and forth, but for 3 days we made little to no progress on the case. She had no identification on her and had not been reported missing. For the moment, there was no way to move forward. All we could do was wait. Local news covered the death of an unidentified woman, and we waited for her family or friends to claim her, but no one did. Not a single call in 3 days. One of our theories involved the old woman having dementia and wandering into the ocean, but still you would think that someone would report her missing. We called all the surrounding nursing home facilities, but again found nothing. Now, what happened next was an accident, really. I was working at my desk on another case and had no desire to answer unrelated phone calls from the reception desk. Sally had other plans, though. She had caught a bad case of the flu and would be out for the next couple days. With no one watching the front desk, we took turns fielding incoming calls. It was Carl Mitchell's turn, but he was nowhere to be found, so I picked up the receiver. The young man was on the other end. "Hello, is this the police?" he asked. "This is the police," I answered calmly. "My fiancée has gone missing. I mean, I don't know if she's missing, but I can't find her anywhere. We were supposed to meet for breakfast yesterday morning." "Okay, when was the last time you saw her?" I asked. "A week ago. We normally see each other every day, but I was out of town for work. I tried calling her, but, well, we had gotten into an argument before I left, and I figured she just wanted some space," he replied. I asked the young man his fiancée's name, age, home address, and various other questions. Her name was Mary. She was 22 years old and had dark brown hair and green eyes. I was about to hang up when I asked him one final question. I don't know why I asked this, because in retrospect it was irrelevant. He hadn't seen her in a week's time, but I asked anyway, "Do you remember what she was wearing when you last saw her?" He thought for a moment, and then he replied, "Yes, I actually do. She was wearing jeans and a gray sweater," he said, pausing. And a necklace." Hesitating, I asked, "Can you describe the necklace?" "I can. It was circles. I mean, it had 3 circles on it," he replied. After hanging up the phone, I called Henry over and told him about the call. "I wonder if they got it from the same place," he said. We both wondered about the coincidence. As the young man was headed to the station, I retrieved the necklace from the evidence room. Perhaps both disappearances could be linked to this item. When the young man arrived, I pulled the necklace out from the evidence bag and set it on the table before him. I instantly realized the mistake I had made. "Oh my God, is she okay?" he stammered. "Where did you find that?" No, this isn't hers. The current case I'm on involves someone with a similar item. It's not her, don't worry. We're still looking for your fiancé." Once he calmed down, the young man confirmed that his fiancée's necklace was indeed the same as the old woman's. I asked him if he knew where she had purchased the necklace, but all he knew was that a few weeks ago, Mary had been overjoyed, telling him how she had found the most beautiful necklace at an old antique shop in the city. We shook hands, and I told him we were doing everything we could to find Mary. That night, Henry and I headed over to take a look around Mary's apartment. Maybe we could find another link between her and the old woman. We spent a couple hours checking her apartment for anything that might help us. In every case, there's always one key piece of information that breaks it. We found nothing out of the ordinary. She seemed very stable, very organized. She was studying to become a lawyer. I was getting ready to head out when I found Henry in Mary's room, sitting on her bed. He held an album of photographs on his lap, and he had paused on a single page. Henry looked up at me without emotion, then back down at the photo. Sitting down next to him, I took a deep breath. The picture showed Mary and her fiancé sitting together on a park bench in what looked like San Francisco. They had asked a friend or passerby to take the photo. Though not yet wearing the necklace, Mary was wearing a pale pink dress, with what looked like little starfish and seahorses embroidered along the collar. We never exactly solved that case, but we had our theories. I still do. I don't know when you're going to read this, but I can tell you when it started. I was out for a walk alone in the woods when the entity came for me. It was beyond a blur. It was, for lack of a better term, absence of meaning. Where it hid, there were no trees. Where it crept closer, there was no grass. Through the art, it leapt at me. There was no breeze of motion. There was no air at all. As it struck, I felt the distinct sensation of claws puncturing me somewhere unseen, somewhere I'd never felt before. My hands and arms and legs seemed fine, and I wasn't bleeding, but I knew I'd been injured somehow. As I fearfully ran back home, I could tell that I was less. I was vaguely tired, and it was hard to focus at times. The solution at that early stage was easy. A big cup of coffee helped me feel normal again. For a while, that subtle drain on my spirit became lost in the ebb and flow of caffeine in my system. You could say my life began that week, actually, because that was when I met March. She and I got along great, though to be honest, I'm pretty sure I fell in love with her over the phone before we even met. It was almost as if the strong emotions of that first week made the entity fight back. It was still with me, latched onto some invisible part of my being. The first few incidents were minor, and I hardly worried about them. The color of a neighbor's car changed from dark blue to black one morning, and I stared at it before shaking my head and shrugging off the difference. 2 days later at work, a coworker's name changed from Fred to Dan. I carefully asked around, but everyone said his name had always been Dan. I figured I'd just been mistaken. Then, as ridiculous as this sounds, I was peeing in my bathroom at home when I suddenly found myself on a random street. I was still in my pajamas, pants down, and urinating, but now in full view of a dozen people at a bus stop. Horrified, I pulled up my clothes and ran before someone called the cops. I did manage to get home, but the experience forced me to admit that I was still in danger. The entity was doing something to me, and I didn't understand how to fight back. Mar showed up that evening, but she had her own key. Hey, I asked her with confusion. How'd you get a key? She just laughed. You are cute. Are you sure you're okay with this? She opened a door and entered a room full of boxes. I know living together is a big step, especially when we've only been dating 3 months. Living together? I literally just met her the week before. The thing was, my mother had always called me a smart cookie for a reason. I knew when to shut my app. Instead of causing a scene, I told her everything was fine, and then I went straight to my room and began investigating. My things were just as I had left them, with no sign of a 3-month gap in habitation. But I did find something out of the ordinary, the date. I shivered angrily as I processed the truth. The entity had eaten 3 months of my life. What the hell was I facing? What kind of creature could consume pieces of one's soul like that? I'd missed the most exciting part of a new relationship, and I would never understand any shared stories or in-jokes from that period. Something absurdly precious had been taken from me, and I was furious. That fury helped suppress the entity. I never imbibed alcohol. I drank coffee religiously. I checked the date every time I woke up. For 3 years, I managed to live each day while observing nothing more than minor alterations. A social fact here and there's someone's job, how many kids they had, that sort of thing, the layout of nearby streets, the time my favorite television show aired, that kind of thing. Always, those changes reminded me that the creature still had its claws sunk into my spirit. Not once in 3 years did I ever let myself zone out. One day, I grew careless. I let myself get really into the season finale of my favorite show. It was gripping, a fantastic story. Right at the height of the action, a young boy came up to my lounge and shook my hand. Surprised, I asked, "Who are you? How did you get in here?" He laughed and smiled brightly. "Silly, Daddy." My heart sank in my chest. I knew immediately what had happened. After a few masked questions, I discovered that he was 2 years old and that he was my son. The agony and heartache filling my chest was nearly unbearable. Not only had I missed the birth of my son, I would never see or know the first years of his life. Mara and I'd obviously gotten married and started a family in the time I had lost, and I had no idea what joys or pains those years contained. It was snowing outside, holding my sudden son in my lap. I sat and watched the flakes fall outside. What kind of life was this going to be if slips and concentration could cost me years? I had to get help. The church had no idea what to do. The priest didn't believe me and told me I had a health issue rather than some sort of possession. The doctors didn't have any clue. Nothing showed up on all their scans and tests, but they happily took my money in return for nothing. By the time I ran out of options, I decided to tell March. There was no way to know what this all looked like from her side. What was I like when I wasn't there? Did I still take our son to school? Did I still do my job? Clearly I did, because she seemed to be none the wiser, but I still had a horrible feeling that something must have been missing in her life when I wasn't actually home inside my own head. But the night I set up a nice dinner in preparation, she arrived not by unlocking the door, but by knocking on it. I answered and found that she was in a nice dress. She was happily surprised by the settings on the table. A fancy dinner for a second date? I knew you were sweet on me. Thank the Lord I knew when to keep my mouth shut. If I had gone on about being married and having a son, she might have run for the hills. Instead, I took her coat and sat down for our second date. Through carefully crafted questions, I managed to deduce the truth. This really was our second day. She saw relief and happiness in me, but interpreted that as dating jitters. I was just excited to realize that the entity wasn't necessarily eating whole portions of my life. The symptoms, as I was beginning to understand them, were more like the consequences of a shattered soul. The creature had wounded me, broken me into pieces. Perhaps I was to live my life out of order, but at least I would actually get to live it. And so it went for a few years from my perspective. While minor changes in politics or geography would happen daily, major shifts in my mental location only happened every couple months. When I found myself in a new place and time in my life, I just shut up and listened, making sure to get the lay of the land before doing anything to avoid making mistakes. On the farthest flung leap yet, I met my 6-year-old grandson, and I asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up. He said, writer. I told him that was a fine idea. Then I was back in month 2 of my relationship with Mar, and I had the best night with her on the riverfront. When I say the best, I mean the best. Knowing how special she would become to me, I asked her to move in. I got to live through what I'd missed the first go-around, and I came to understand that I was never mentally absent. I would always be there eventually. When we were moving her boxes in, she stopped for a moment and said she marveled at my great love, as if I'd known her for a lifetime and never once doubted she was the one. That was the first time I truly laughed freely and wholeheartedly since the entity had wounded me. She was right about my love for her, but for exactly the reason she considered a silly romantic analogy. I had known her my whole life, and had come to terms with my situation and found peace with IT that IT wasn't so bad to have sneak peeks at all the best parts ahead. But of course I wouldn't be writing this if it hadn't gotten worse. The entity was still with me. It had not wounded me and departed like I'd wanted to believe. The closest I can describe my growing understanding was that the creature was burrowing deeper into my psyche, fracturing it into smaller pieces. Instead of months between major shifts, I began having only weeks. Once I noticed that trend, I feared my ultimate fate would be to jump between times in my life heartbeat by heartbeat, forever confused, forever lost. Only an instant in each time meant I would never be able to speak with anyone else, never be able to hold a conversation, never express or receive love. As the true depth of that fear came upon me, I sat in an older version of me and watched the snow falling outside. That was the one constant in my life. The weather didn't care who I was or what pains I had to face. Nature was always there. The falling snow was always like a little hook that kept me in a place. The pure emotional peace it brought me was like a panacea on my mental wounds. And I'd never yet shifted while watching the pattern of falling white and thinking of the times I'd gone sledding or built the snow for it as a child. A teenager touched my arm. Grandpa? Would startle me out of my thoughts, so I was less careful than usual. Who are you? He half grinned, as if not sure whether I was joking. Handing me a stack of papers, he said, "It's my first attempt at a novel. Would you read it and tell me what you think?" Of course. Pursuing that dream of being a writer, I see. He burned bright red. Trying to anyway. All right, run off. I'll read this right now. The words were blurry and annoyed. I looked for glasses I probably had for reading. Being old was terrible, and I wanted to leap back into a younger year. But not before I read his book. I found my glasses in a sweater pocket and began leafing through. Mar puttered in and out of the living room, still beautiful, but I had to focus. I didn't know how much time I would have there. It seemed that we had relatives over. Was it Christmas? A pair of adults and a couple kids I didn't recognize tramped through the hallway, and I saw my son, now an adult, walk by with his wife on the way out the door. As a group, the extended family began sledding outside. Finally, I finished reading the story and I called out for my grandson. He rushed down the stairs and into the living room. How was it? Well, it's terrible, I told him truthfully. But it's terrible for all the right reasons. You're still a young man, so your characters behave like young people. but the structure of the story itself is very solid. I paused. I didn't expect it to turn out to be a horror story. He nodded. It's a reflection of the times. Expectations for the future are dismal, not hopeful like they used to be. You're far too young to be aware like that, told him. An idea occurred to me. If you're into horror, do you know anything about strange creatures? Sure. I read everything I can. I love it. Warily, I scanned the entrances to the living room. Everyone was busy outside. For the first time, I opened up to someone in my life about what I was experiencing. In hushed tones, I told him about my fragmented consciousness. For a teenager, he took a well. You're serious? Yes. He donned the determined look of a grown man accepting a quest. I'll look into it, see what I can find out. You should start writing down everything you experience, build some data. Maybe we can map your psychic wound. Well, sounds like a plan. I was surprised. That made sense, and I hadn't expected him to have a serious response. But how will I get all the notes in one place? Let's come up with somewhere for you to leave them, he said, frowning with thought. Then I'll get them, and we can trace the path you're taking through your own life. See if there's a pattern. For the first time since the situation had gotten worse, I felt hope again. How about under the stairs? Nobody ever goes under there. Sure. He turned and left the living room. I peered after him. I heard him banging around near the stairs. Finally, he returned with a box, laid it on the carpet, and opened it to reveal a bursting stack of papers. He exclaimed, "Holy crap." But of course, being a teenager, he didn't really say crap. Taken aback, I blinked rapidly, forgiving his cussing because of the shock. Did I write those? He looked up at me in wonder. Yeah, or you will. You still have to write them and put them under the stairs after this. He gazed back down at the papers, then covered the box. So you probably shouldn't see what they say. That could get weird. That much I understood, he gulped. There are like 50 boxes under there, all filled up like this. Deciphering these will take a long time. His tone dropped to deadly seriousness. But I'll save you, Grandpa, because I don't think anyone else can. Tears flowed down my cheeks then, and I couldn't help but sob once or twice. I hadn't realized how lonely I'd become in my shifting prison of awareness until I finally had someone who understood. Thank you. Thank you so much. And then I was young again, and at work on a random Tuesday. Once the sadness and relief faded, anger and determination replaced them. After I finished my work, I grabbed some paper and began writing. While the weeks shifted around me, while those weeks became days and then hours, I wrote every single spare moment about when and where I thought I was. I put them under the stairs out of order. My first box was actually the 13th, and my last box was the 1st. Once I had over 50 boxes written from my perspective, and once my shifting became a matter of minutes, I knew it was up to my grandson to take it from there. I put my head down and stopped looking. I couldn't stand the river of changing awareness any longer. Names and places and dates and jobs and colors, and people were all wrong and different. I'd never been older. I sat watching the snow fall. A man of at least 30 that I vaguely recognized entered the room. Come on, I think I finally figured it out. I was so frail that moving was painful. Are you him? Are you my grandson? Yes. He took me to a room filled with strange equipment and sat me in a rubber chair facing a large mirror twice the height of a man. The pattern finally revealed itself. How long have you worked on this? I asked him, aghast. Tell me you didn't miss your life like I'm missing mine. His expression was both stone cold and furiously resolute. It'll be worth it. He brought 2 thin metal rods close to my arm and then nodded at the mirror. Look, this shock is carefully calibrated. The electric zap from his device was startling, but not painful. In the mirror, I saw a rapid, arcing light silhouette appear above my head and shoulder. The electricity moved through the creature like a wave, briefly revealing the terrible nature of what was happening to me. A bulging, leech-like mouth was wrapped around the back of my head, coming down to my eyebrows and touching each ear. And its slug-like body ran over my shoulder and into my very soul. It was a parasite, and it was feeding on my mind. My now adult grandson held my hand as I took in horror. After a moment, he asked, "Removing it is going to hurt very badly. Are you up for this?" Fearful, I asked, "Is Mar here?" His face softened. "No, not for a few years now." I could tell from his reaction what had happened, but I didn't want it to be true. "How?" "We have this conversation a lot," he responded. "Are you sure you want to know?" "It never makes you feel better." Tears brimmed in my eyes that I don't care if it hurts or if I die. I don't want to stay in a time when she's not alive. He made a sympathetic noise of understanding and then returned to his machines to hook several wires, diodes, and other bits of technology to my limbs and forehead. While he did so, he talked. "I've worked for 2 decades to figure this out, and I've had a ton of help from other researchers of the occult. This parasite doesn't technically exist in our plane. It's one of the lesser spawns, and it feeds on the plexus of mind, soul, and quantum consciousness and reality. When details like names and colors of objects changed, you weren't going crazy. The web of your existence was merely losing strands as the creature ate its way through you. I didn't fully understand. I looked up in confusion as he placed a circlet of electronics like a crown on my head in exactly the same place where the parasite's mouth had ringed me. He paused his work and grew pale. "I forgot that you wouldn't know." "You're lucky, believe me." After a deep breath, he began moving again and placed his fingers near a few stitches. "Ready? Ready? This is carefully tuned to make your nervous system extremely unappetizing to the parasite. But it's basically electroshock therapy." I could still see Mars smile. I'd just been with her moments ago. "Do it." The click of a switch echoed in my ears, and I almost laughed at how mild the electricity was. It didn't feel like anything, at least at first. Then I saw the mirror shaking and my body within that image convulsing. Oh no, it did hurt. Nothing had ever been more painful. It was just so excruciating that my mind hadn't been able to immediately process it. As my vision shook and fire burned in every nerve of my body, I could see the reflected, trembling, light silhouette of the parasite on my head as it writhed in agony equal to mine. It had claws, 6 clawed, lizard-like limbs under its leech-like body, and it cut into me in an attempt to stay latched on. The electricity made my memories flare. Mars' smile was foremost, lit brightly in front of a warm fire as the snow fell past the window behind her. The edges of that memory began lighting up, and I realized that my life was one continuous stretch of experience. It was only the awareness of it that had been fragmented by the feasting evil on my back. I never managed to be there for the birth of my son. I jumped around it a dozen times, but never actually lived it. For the first time, I got to hold Mars' hand and be there for her. No, that moment had shifted seamlessly into holding her hand as she lay in a hospital bed for a very different reason. Not this. God, why? It was so merciless to make me remember this. I broke down in tears as nurses rushed into the room. I didn't want to know. I didn't want to experience it. I'd seen all the good parts, but I hadn't wanted the worst part. The inevitable end that all would one day face. It wasn't worth it. It was tainted. All that joy was given back 10,000-fold as pain. The fire in my body and in my brain surged to sheer white torture, and I screamed. My scream faded into a surprised shout as the machines and electricity and chair faded away. Snow was no longer falling around my life. I was out in the woods on a bright summer day. Oh, God. I turned to see the creature approaching me. It was the same absence of meaning, the same blankness in reality. It crept forward, just like before. But this time, it hissed and turned away. I stood, astounded at being young again and freed from the parasite. My grandson had actually done it. He'd made me an unappetizing meal, so the predator of mind and soul had moved on in search of a different snack. I returned home in a daze, and while I was sitting there processing all that had happened, the phone rang. I looked at it in awe and sadness. I knew who it was. It was Marjorie, calling for the first time for some trivial reason she'd admit 30 years later was made up just to talk to me. But all I could see was her lying in that hospital bed, dying. It was going to end in unspeakable pain and loneliness. I would become an old man. Left to sit by myself in an empty house, his soulmate gone long before him. At the end of it all, the only thing I would have sitting and watching the falling snow. But now, thanks to my grandson, I would also have my memories. It would be a wild ride, no matter how it ended. On a sudden impulse, I picked up the phone. With a smile, I asked, "Hey, who's this?" Even though I already knew. They put up a tall fence covered with black tarp and topped by barbed wire, surrounding Lake Colette at the center of Juniper Valley, so that no one could see what they were doing. 2 of the 3 local cop cars were stationed 24/7 at either end, one to the east and one to the west. This all went on for 3 days while some unknown official body did what needed to be done. Then, overnight, the black barbed wire fence was gone, replaced with the normal chain link variety. A few middle school kids dared Kevin Witter to apply a pair of wire cutters and sneak in. My old half-brother knew Kevin. The kid claimed to have seen unmarked vans and a bevy of sunglasses wearing government agents with automatic weapons surrounding a team of scientists in hazmat suits, dragging the carcass of a monster out of the water. The monster had 10 legs, the skin of an alligator, and the body of a squid, or the body of a shark, or matted fur or feathers or teeth. It changed part telling, and it was all bullshit. I'm guessing Kevin Witter either chickened out before doing the deed, or else was picked up by the cops as soon as he approached the fence. At the end of 3 days, some early risers in Juniper Valley reported seeing 3 unmarked cars heading east on Skylark Road, towards a highway and the Air Force Base and the Palmdale Airport. Whatever government agency was operating behind the blockade, searching the lake, they were gone without a trace by the time the sun came up. And whatever they found, they weren't telling. The cops were clueless. All they told us townsfolk was that, due to a bacterial infestation, we were not to swim in the lake until further notice. I will never swim in that lake again, and I hope to God they killed them all. I stayed in Juniper Valley during the summer with my father. He and my stepmother loved it there. I loved the isolation and the small town lifestyle, though I would hesitate to even call Juniper Valley a town. It's an unincorporated cluster of ranch-style homes planted like a pimple among the Sierra Pelona Mountains. In the 90s, the population of Juniper Valley and the surrounding hills was 800 and changed. There was 1 general store in town, 1 gas station, 1 church, and 1 dirty little inn with a bar restaurant. Anything else one would need could be found in Palmdale, a 45-minute drive east, through miles of grid power lines and golden flatland, dotted with silos and scrap metal. The town resembles a bowl with Lake Colette at the basin, and streets and houses arrange around the edges, along the slopes of the surrounding hills. Calling Lake Colette a lake is also stretching things a little bit. It's a sag pond right on the San Andreas Fault, which cuts straight through Juniper Valley. During droughts, Lake Colette would drain to a glorified puddle, a mossy marsh of waist-high weeds. There were quite a few rainy years during my childhood. Lake Colette would remain a proper body of water then, even in the midst of a hot, dry summer. I'd look out my bedroom window at the lake, below the dim circles of light cast by the 2 street lamps on Skylark Road, pitch black like a tar pit. On moonless nights, it seemed bottomless, and I felt as though it could be a kilometers deep well, a black hole. I grew up. My months in Juniper Valley became skull-crushingly boring. My dad and stepmother worked, my half-siblings attended a summer program at their school, and my friends were 70 miles away. The nearest library was almost as far, and the rabbit-eared TV picked up 3 channels, local access from Palmdale, the Bible Channel, and assorted infomercials. It was my step-grandmother who told me about the Will Fell Animal Sanctuary. She went to church with a lady around the place, a retired park ranger named Kathy. The shelter was a non-profit funded solely by donations with an all-volunteer staff. Kathy owned an acre of hillside land off Skylark Road just west of town, a 15-minute walk from my father's house. I was 13 the first summer I volunteered at Will Fell, and I went back every summer after. They loved me there. By they, I mean the only 2 staff members. Kathy, an earthly woman in her 60s who functioned as CEO, manager, accountant, and primary caretaker of the animals, and Jacques, a 27-year-old autistic man who cleaned cages and walked dogs as part of a government-subsidized program. And I fell in love with the animals. There were about 60 of them, homeless dogs and unwanted cats. There were 2 huge kennels in Kathy's large backyard, built by her sons, 1 for dogs and 1 for cats. Farther back, rabbit hutches, and at the far end, against the sturdy fence, a tiny stable that housed an elderly racehorse and a fat little donkey. When Pounds and Palmdale and Lancaster received animals they had no room for, they'd give them to Kathy. She'd drive her rickety old windowless van east to the highway, then come back hours later with new furry charges. Sometimes she'd even function as a poor man's dog catcher. Agencies would direct her towards residences from Juniper Valley to Acton, asking her to remove starving, nearly hairless dogs from gardens and pull emaciated cats out from under cars. These were the highway strays, abandoned on the 14 by individuals who no longer wished to be pet owners. That first summer, I met Jane. Jane was a friend of Kathy's, a retired Navy nurse who worked as an at-home caregiver and took in homeless cats. She visited Wildfell at least once a week, sometimes bringing large bags of cat food. Jane was a rough lady, tanned, sinewy, wrinkly beyond her years, only ever seen wearing stained wife beaters and baggy fatigues. She never married, had no family I knew of, and seemed to prefer the company of cats to humans. Kathy considered her an asset. She'd taken 20 cats at a time, accepting responsibility when we had no more room. She owned a half-acre a few miles southwest of town, off a shabby two-lane road called Oak Tree Lane. Oak Tree Lane snakes between gray-green hills before dead-ending deep in the Angeles National Forest. Rusting mailboxes stick out of the ground like flags at the head of dirt roads, leading to remote ranches and groves and campgrounds. Jane's cottage was at the end of one of these dirt roads, in a little clearing carpeted with knee-high weeds and prickly shrubs, surrounded on three sides by gently sloping hills. She'd take me there sometimes. There were always cats everywhere. Cats inside and out, cats on a sofa, cats sitting atop Jane's washer, cats sunning themselves, stalking field mice and butterflies. I'd spend hours at Jane's house with her cats, helping her clean up and clean litter boxes, cuddling kittens from the occasional litter. Jane liked me. Since she obviously felt little need for human companionship, I took this as the highest of compliments. Every summer on the first day I'd see her, Jane would break out into the biggest, brightest smile that Kathy swore she reserved only for me. "You're like me, Matthew," Jane would say, as I stared out the window of her 1979 El Camino. "You can cut through anyone's bullshit and see their soul. That's why you love animals so much. Your standards for souls are higher than most." The earthquake hit the winter of my junior year. I remember waking in the middle of the night, roused by the thud of my precariously placed math book falling off my desk. The mild shaking lasted about 3.5 seconds. Then I realized I'd experienced an earthquake. My dad, his family, and Juniper Valley were hit a bit harder. Positioned on the San Andreas Fault and close to the remote epicenter, structural damage was rather extensive. The mess had been cleared up by summer, but I noticed broken sandbag barricades and new violent cracks along Skylark Road. Lake Colette looked more robust than I'd ever seen it, but was surrounded by a chain-like fence. The water had taken on a greenish tinge and hosted islands of thick, yellowish scum. For now, it was closed to the public. Kathy's windowless van still hadn't broken down, but she was tired of driving it all over the valley, so she handed me the keys. I enjoyed it at first, rambling through Golden Plains until I saw the boxy developments of Palmdale, rescuing filthy, unloved creatures from the clutches of abusive owners or uncaring bureaucracy. Jane had all but disappeared. Her last nursing charge had passed away, and she was rarely seen in town. Only at the general store, Kathy told me, and very rarely. I think Kathy and I were the only people in Juniper Valley who noticed her absence. I missed Jane. I missed the way her face lit up when she saw me and the warm summer afternoons spent in her backyard. I called her landline once, had been disconnected. Soon the cats started appearing. My third day back, I was sitting in Kathy's office when I received a phone call from a talkative old lady in town. There was a cat in her backyard. It had been sitting in a lower branch of her oak tree for hours. "I think it's someone's pet," she said. "It's too chubby to be a stray." This, in and of itself, was not an extraordinary event. Everyone in town knew Kathy ran a shelter and wouldn't frequently call her in lieu of animal control when an unknown animal became a bother. Sometimes said animal would be a neighbor's lost pet. Other times, a runaway that had wandered from Palmdale. Kathy always made an effort to find the owner. Rarely, a feral, abandoned highway stray would make it to Juniper Valley. These poor creatures were always half-dead things with matted fur and exposed, dotted skin. They usually had to be euthanized or died before the local vet got the chance. At first, I assumed the calm, well-groomed gray and white shorthair I found in the old lady's oak tree was the former, a townie's escaped house cat. I tried to coax the thing down with a can of tuna, no dice. It wasn't remotely interested in the food. It just started. Black, depthless eyes locked on something that wasn't me. I stood, tuna in an outstretched hand, looking like an idiot, for 5 frustrating minutes before giving up and going to the van to grab Kathy's net. When I got back, the cat was gone. I never saw it again. It bothered me all night. It was like the cat had been messing with me. And it happened again and again. Homeowner after homeowner of Juniper Valley calling Will Fell and asking us to remove a cat from their property. Always cats. Always different cats. I don't think I ever saw the same one twice. The homeowner always insisted he or she had never seen the animal before, and they never had collars. They always appeared well-fed if not overfed. Their fur, though not show quality, was thick and intact. It became troubling. Juniper Valley had a population of 842. It was located 45 minutes from the nearest town and surrounded on 3 sides by hills and forest. Everyone knew everyone else's pets, and the sudden appearance of so many unaccounted for cats was mysterious to say the least. And these cats were not like any cats I'd ever seen before. They liked fresh water. I'd find them sitting in fountains and kiddie pools. They didn't seem to like the sun. They'd come out at night or else be found in some shaded, dark, enclosed space. They were silent, never hissing or meowing. They were really, really good at getting in and out of places. I found one curled up in the back of a lady's car. Though she admitted she'd left the door unlocked, the physical act of opening and closing the door should have been impossible for a creature with only paws at its disposal. They were smart. Supernaturally smart. At times, I fell under the disturbing impression the cat was taunting me. I'd be setting up some trap or extending the net. The cat would sit there, calm and cool, watching intently. There'd be a minute in which I'd have some semblance of hope I'd finally catch the thing this time, and then the cat would dart out of my grasp or vanish the moment I turned my back. The weirdest part was, once or twice, the cat stopped before running off and looked at me. I could swear it was laughing. And they all shared the same icy, emotionless black eyes. I wished they didn't remind me so much of the empty eyes staring from the euthanized corpses I saw at Willful. Finally, I caught one. It was early July. I was quite pleased with my cunning. I bought one of those huge plastic storage tubs from the general store, filled it with water, stuck it in the back of the van, and waited for my feline quarry. A large pug-faced tabby this time. After an hour of hiding in the cab, the cat climbed down from the roof where I'd found it and into the waiting reservoir. I raced to the back, slammed the van doors, donned leather gloves, and prepared for a hissing, clawing fight. But surprisingly, the cat didn't struggle at all. It was fully submerged in the water, curled up on the bottom of the container like a rock. I picked it up, shoved it in a cage, dumped out the water, and drove. It wasn't until I was halfway to Will Fell that I noticed the smell. Once, my 9-year-old son dropped a fish stick in the back of my car and forgot about it. A humid summer week later, my car smelled just like that cat had. When we got there, the chubby cat put up about as much of a fight as it had in the van. I didn't hold it for long. Years of experience with scared animals taught me that the less time spent with claws inches from my face, the better. But the short span of time the cat was in my hands was enough to make me seriously uncomfortable. It was heavy and somehow doughy. My hand sunk into its flesh like a silly putty, and it was cold, and I left the cat in the quarantine cage in Kathy's office. We usually only used the cage for animals that were obviously ill, which the tabby was not. But there was just something wrong with this cat, like it shouldn't be mixed with others of its species. I gave it bowls of kibble and water, then sat down at the desk to fill out an application for a grant. Kathy was gone for the weekend, visiting her sister in Bakersfield. Jacques was in the back cleaning out the pony stall. I couldn't concentrate, not with that cat there. I looked over my shoulder every other minute. Each time I'd see the same thing, a flat-faced tabby sitting in its water bowl, staring at me. It never blinked. It never moved. It didn't even appear to breathe. The rotting, fishy odor filled the room. Finally, I cracked. I double-checked the latch on the cat's cage, locked the office door, and pretended to be busy feeding the dogs. I called a vet and asked if he could come by and take a look at the feline, but he said he wouldn't be able to for another week. The next morning, I found the office window wide open, the quarantine cage open, and the cat gone. I wasn't disappointed. Not long after that, everyone started talking about little Charlie Henderson. Charlie was 12 and had been skateboarding alone shortly before midnight in the parking lot by Lake Colette. The lake was still scum-covered and fenced off, and the occupants of the nearest homes had long since packed it in for the night. The way he told it, Charlie had been approached by a cat. He bent over to pet it, and the cat danced away, leading him to a grove of trees behind the lake. He followed the cat. Then, suddenly, he was attacked by a small army of cats. They jumped from the trees and emerged from the shadows, latching onto his clothing and limbs and dragging him toward a hole in a fence. If a lost car hadn't pulled into the parking lot and turned around, causing the cats to scatter and giving him time to run away, well, who knows what they'd have done with him. No one believed him, of course. Everyone assumed he'd been attacked by maybe one feral cat, and his imagination had taken over. Because cats don't corner people and jump on them. That takes organization and planning, intelligence not possessed by house pets. And his story got weird, too. He claimed one of the cats had stretched itself like a silly putty and grew an opposable thumb. Then Jane came back. It was a cloudy afternoon, and I was taking advantage of the slight cool down to deep clean the dog kennel. Kathy was gone again in Riverside watching her granddaughter play softball. I was busy scraping dry dog crap off the concrete when Jock ran out to tell me there was a lady asking for me. I wiped off my hands and went inside to find Jane staring at me from Kathy's living room. Jane had never been obsessive about her appearance, but if I hadn't known her so well, I would have assumed the gaunt, trembling figure in a stained wife-beater was a homeless woman. Her hair was a frizzy, matted mess of gray. Her arms and chest were striped with lacerations of varying degrees of depth in various stages of healing. And her eyes, which at once seemed to serve as a window to a rational, calculating mind, now allowed a glimpse into bloodshot insanity. "Jane," I said, "are you okay?" She didn't smile. "Do you have any?" she asked. I frowned. "What?" "Cats, Matthew," was the curt reply. "It's the cats. I need the cats. They've been wondering." I gave her what I hoped was a kind smile. "Okay, Jane, I can show you the cats, but Kathy said I'm not allowed to have any of them adopted without her around." That was a lie, but I wasn't about to pass Jane custody of a pet. Cock, let alone a living, breathing creature. She was obviously not in the physical, emotional, or mental state to care for anything, not even herself. I walked her out to the cat kennel. As expected, a small herd of dogs ran towards Jane to sniff her and beg for attention. Then, about 3 feet from her, the dogs stopped. They sniffed the air, whined, and ran off in all directions. Not a single one of them got nearer. Jane looked over the cats seriously, then sighed in disappointment. She shook her head, turned around, and paced back to Kathy's house. "You haven't caught any," she said. "What are you talking about?" I asked. She glared, looking through me. She could cut through anyone's bullshit and see their soul. "You know what I mean, Matthew. My cats? Call me if you catch one. There's so many of them now, and they're getting bigger." With that, she walked out the door. She stopped and turned around. And Matthew watched the length. I spent the rest of the day in a daze. I've been wondering where the weird cats came from. They didn't belong to anyone in Juniper Valley, and it was hard to believe that they'd all migrated from Palmdale. Jane took in homeless cats. Maybe they were hers. I didn't know why they would have left food, water, and shelter to wander for miles along an isolated road and into a neighborhood, but was at least a possibility. That night, following a tangled motivation I couldn't put into words, I borrowed my father's car and drove to the parking lot by Lake Colette, where Charlie Henderson had been attacked. I pulled right up to the fence, turned off my car, let my eyes adjust to the darkness. I obeyed Jane. I watched the lake. I hadn't sat for 10 minutes before I saw movement. A black shape creeping out of the shadows and approaching the water's edge. More movement against the clump of trees to my right. Cautiously, quietly, I opened the car door and stepped out. I shut the door gently and tiptoed towards the fence. A large black cat waded in the dirty lake. Its paws were inundated. It kept on going. I came closer until I was grasping the metal links of the fence, and I felt it quiver under my fingers. I looked to my right and saw them. Two more cats, huge cats, the biggest I'd ever seen. Cats climbing down the fence like monkeys. Head first, completely vertical. One, then the other, jumped gracefully to the ground and stepped into the feeble light bleeding from the two streetlights. One was yellow, the other a tabby. The first cat was almost completely submerged. With the lightest gurgle, it ducked under the scum-covered waterline into the black hole. The light wasn't good at all. It looked as though the second and third cats had flattened when they hit the ground, like Play-Doh thrown at a wall. And there was something about how they moved. They jiggled. Their legs bent the wrong way. Or maybe it was just the shitty lighting. Where was the black cat? It couldn't still be underwater. Ripples in the lake, small islands of yellow scum shifted in gentle waves. I didn't feel a breeze. There was something else in there. A cadence of nerves was triggered in my brain, forgotten but immediately recognizable like a song. I was scared of Lake Colette, scared like I had been as a child, when the black water had seemed from my bedroom window a bottomless well. I ran to my car. I did a donut in the parking lot and sped home. The next morning was hot and bright, and under the cloudless sky, it all seemed ridiculous. I was letting Charlie Henderson rumors get to me. I walked past Lake Colette on my way to Willfell. I went right up to the fence. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. No cats in sight. A light breeze ruffled the water. I breathed in and gagged. It smelled like rotting fish mixed with a McDonald's dumpster. It smelled like the pug-faced tabby I'd caught. Cats don't like water. Cats don't swim. I'd spent nearly half a decade surrounded by cats, and the cats I'd been chasing around yards and spying on the night before weren't cats. That smell. The way the tabby I'd caught, it felt when I held it. Bloated and putty-like. Oh, those cats didn't purr or meow. They didn't eat. Their intelligence. And that stare. Those glassy, corpse-like eyes that seemed to take in everything and nothing. And Jane, her cats, she'd said, they've been wondering. They're getting bigger. Maybe she was going nuts living out there all alone in the wilds, a mile away from her nearest human neighbor. The dogs wouldn't come near her. Her own cats had been attacking her, apparently. How else to explain the scratches all over? Yet, still, she was desperate to have them back. I had to talk to Jane again. Kathy was still gone, and it was Jacques Day off, so I planned on heading to Jane's lonely dirt road as soon as I fed the animals. But a couple from Palmdale called unexpectedly, asking if they could come by with their daughter to pick out a pet. By the time they'd selected a corgi mix and made arrangements to have the dog neutered, it was after 5. It was fine, it was still light out. I locked up, grabbed the keys to the van, and made my way into the hills. My teenage bravado waned as I traveled farther and farther away from Juniper Valley. There's no defined town line, but when you reach the intersection of Skylark and Oak Tree Lane, you're essentially watching civilization shrink in your rearview mirror. I'd forgotten just how far away Jane's shack was from anything, and just how desolate and lonely the mountain road became. I didn't see a single other car the whole time. Finally, I came to the rusted blue mailbox with Jane's numbers on the side. I turned on the dirt road. When I reached the apex, I saw Jane's shack. Carefully, foot on the brake, I made my way down into the valley. It didn't look like Jane was home. There was no light coming from the windows. I pulled up closer into the driveway past the house to the carport in the back. The back door was wide open, and Jane's El Camino was there. The cats weren't. No cats lounging in piles by the stairs. None prowling around the yard. I pulled behind Jane's car, climbed out of the van, and strolled into the backyard. Jane's empty property looked lovely as dusk. Beautiful trees reaching for the heavens. Majestic first meeting fluffy white clouds like an Old West movie backdrop. She must have been hiding in the house. She must have crept up behind me, because I don't remember feeling the blow. I woke up lying in cool, moist dirt. I was looking at the water. Lake Colette? No, I saw nothing but hills and foliage in the distance. Where the hell was I? I sat up. My head spun. I felt blood in my hair. I was sitting on the bank of a small pond. The water was greenish and thick with algae, covered in thick yellow scum. I took a breath and lurched. The smell. Rotting fish. Rotting flesh. Fast food dumpster. Stronger than I'd ever smelled it before. The water moved. Something was emerging a few feet in front of me, swimming to shore. A black cat, paddling with uncomfortable, almost human strokes. I scrambled backwards, away from the approaching creature. It reached land and pulled itself onto the bank. It stood up. The black cat's weight shifted, its belly bulged, its lower leg swelled, became shorter and fatter. The effect was the same as squeezing a stress ball. Instead of a creature with a skeleton and tendons and muscles, I was being approached by a thing with the consistency of jelly wearing a furry suit. I screamed and stumbled to my feet. Then I felt icy fingers curl around my neck. I struggled and instinctively horse-kicked my unseen attacker. The hand loosened and I whirled around. I was face to face with Jane, but it wasn't Jane. Her face was round and flat, boneless. The wrinkles under her eyes had smoothed themselves out, and her nose bulged like a mushroom. And her eyes, the maniacal glint, were gone from her eyes. So was the consciousness, so was the recognition, so was the vitality. Her pupils were so dilated her irises were no longer visible, and what had been white was now completely red. Her eyes didn't move. They were those of a corpse. Then something in the water grabbed my hand. Something cold and soft and rubber-like, slimy, but very, very strong. It pulled me. It was pulling me into the water. Jane stood over me, smiling. She bent down, hands outstretched, pudgy, bloated hands attached to rope-like arms that jiggled and curled and changed shape. What happened next is a blur. I remember clawing, kicking, and screaming at the top of my lungs. And then I was running, stumbling, lungs burning, stinging, aching, cursing the spongy, weeded ground that gave under my feet. I pushed through dry shrubs and jumped over tree branches, praying I was going in a direction that would lead me to humanity, and that the crinkling of grass behind me was only my imagination. Then I was on top of the hill, looking down at Jane's shack. And then I was in Jane's yard. I saw the van and jumped in the driver's seat, silently thanking the guardian angel that distracted me, so I'd left my keys in the ignition. I slammed the door. I looked up, out the windshield, and into the red and black empty eyes of the thing that had been Jane. It was smiling. She always reserved a special smile for me. I turned the key and gunned it. The van jerked violently. I slammed down the brakes, kicking up dirt like smoke. I felt a sticky moisture against my cheeks. I took a breath and barely managed to pull open the door before I vomited. Even thinking about that acidic, rotting seafood stench induces a nauseous tickle in the back of my throat. I'd crushed Jane under the front right tire. She popped. The van still ran. I drove it straight to the police station. In the parking lot, I surveyed the damage. The front bumper was dented and a headlight was out. There was no blood. The mangled metal was splattered with glossy, opaque white goo. I was almost completely honest with the sleepy-eyed desk cop. I said that Jane tried to drown me in the hills behind her home, chased me to the van, and then I ran her over, but I left out the part where her body had taken on the properties of pasta and silly putty. The cop asked sarcastically if I'd been doing any drugs, but radioed a car to the site. Over the next week, I was questioned multiple times by the police. Their questions became increasingly bizarre, to the point where they were asking about toxic chemicals and lights in the sky seriously, and whether I was or had ever been involved with a heavy metal band or a cult. This was the late 90s. I was chastised for driving down a loamy back road alone to approach a crazy woman, but I was never charged with a crime. The cops were cagey, but they'd found something. By the next morning, Oak Tree Lane was blocked off by the county sheriffs, and the inhabitants of the hills had been roughly evacuated with no explanation. Then came more sheriffs, then the unmarked cars, then the tall black barbed wire fence around Lake Colette. Jane's death was reported as a freak accident. I tried to forget. I holed up in my room watching happy movies on VHS until my mom came to take me back home. I went back to school. I threw myself into studying and applying for college. When I needed to, I snuck my mom's sleeping pills. Eventually, however, curiosity overwhelmed my fear. I wanted answers, so I elected to spend the following summer, my last before college, in Juniper Valley with my father. Wolfell was no more. Kathy had left the animals with a larger no-kill shelter in Acton, retired and moved to Riverside. There was a large for sale sign in front of what had once been her home, and it had been a dry winter. The chain-link fence, broken and bent, still surrounded Lake Colette, but the lake was little more than a puddle. I got a job waiting tables at a bar restaurant. I spent my nights serving burgers to bored townies, trying to strike up conversations about the strange events of the previous summer. The shadowy agents, the fence, the crazy cat lady. I was offered nothing but rumors, speculation, and good old-fashioned lies. Finally, I met a man named Aaron. He was in his 20s, chubby and socially awkward. He worked as a counselor at a camp for disabled children. He talked about Dungeons and Dragons a little bit too much, and his uncle was a local cop. It was a slow night. I shot the shit with Aaron for a while. When I asked him if he'd heard about the crazy cat lady who died last year, he played it off like a tabloid headline, but I'd noticed his eyes widened and his hands trembled. I guess I got lucky. Aaron's cop uncle apparently had a weakness for Jack Daniels and a tendency to ignore police confidentiality when drunk. And that weakness must have been genetic, because an hour later, Aaron was singing like a canary. The night Jane had tried to kill me, 2 cops had been dispatched to her home off Oak Tree Lane, expecting to find an empty bottle of Everclear and a discarded bag of shrooms. Instead, they found what had been Jane. Pieces of her were scattered across the ground like debris. They radioed for backup, and a small posse spent the remainder of the night on a scavenger hunt for vital organs. They found skin. Plenty of skin. The piece that once covered her back was folded in a torn white tank top. Her bones and organs seemed strangely melted, as though pulled from a vat of acid or digested. It was like one officer had said Jane had been skinned from the inside, then filled with acidic goo like a water balloon. Everything was coated in a white, translucent jelly substance. The officers had taken a sample to be tested, but by the next morning it had evaporated into a powdery white stain. The big guns were called in. Sheriffs, agents from multiple government divisions, he couldn't say who exactly. The local cops had been pushed out of the investigation by that point. He had heard that upon searching Jane's property, they found an axe, multiple firearms, boxes of ammo, and 10 cat skins buried 1.5 feet deep in the backyard, mostly with their heads detached and all coated in the familiar white powder. They scoured the hills behind Jane's property, and they found a pond. The small pond that, according to land surveying reports, had not existed before the earthquake and the rains of the previous winter. They drained it. At the bottom, they found 24 more cat skins. The insides were all gone, yet the skins were unmarred. At no point had they been cut apart or sewn together. Again, it appeared as if something had eaten or dissolved all the blood, bones, and vital organs, except for the teeth and the eyeballs. The eyeballs were left intact to stare hauntingly into oblivion. After the discovery, they dragged Lake Colette as well. Aaron didn't know what they had found there. The citizens of Juniper Valley were urged to stay away. It's been nearly 20 years. I'm a veterinarian now. I've done some digging, spent hours and quarters on the internet where I've seen things I can't unsee and made some new friends, but I still don't have answers. I don't know what changed Jane's cats that summer. Were they infected? Possessed? I think it was something in the water, hyper-intelligent, blob-like things that had been dormant for years, brought to the surface by that earthquake. But this is all conjecture, my opinion. All those years ago, I told Aaron, the chubby camp counselor, everything. He listened, eyes widening but never doubting. The next morning, he and I took his car down Oak Tree Lane, to the wrestling blue mailbox, and finally the abandoned shack where I had passed so many summer days. We hiked a mile into the hills, carrying 2 shovels and my father's rifle. We found the hole that had once been a pond, now a weeded ditch. We got to work. It was hard work. It was dirty work. It took a few trips. But by the end of August, we had leveled the land and completely filled the hole with dirt. I don't know what was down there, but if there's more, they're not getting out.